name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan, and welcome to the second episode of the first God Week in this series, where we're talking about Thor. And today, we're going to be comparing the mythological version of Thor versus the Marvel version of Thor. Now, of course, I am referring to the movies of Thor. Obviously, there is a comic series around it. I am aware of it. But I do believe the Marvel movie version of Thor had more of an impact on the religion aspect of all of this, of having people actually choose Thor as a deity to follow. Because one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is because I'm concerned why it seems like so few people actually follow Thor as a deity, considering the fact that we have so much information on him. Of all the deities we have, we know so much about him, even of some of the pre-Christian Scandinavian society worship of him. I mean, we know of temples that were built with his idols inside of, and of course we know of the Mjolnir and its influence in the pre-Christian Scandinavian times, and we can definitely tell that he was one of the more primary deities followed within Norway and Iceland, and even today still is one of the more primary deities venerated and honored in Iceland. And so why here in this modern era does it seem like that most new practitioners of this faith kind of stay away from Thor? And I think it's because of the misconceptions that Marvel has made for him. Later in this series of Studying a God a Week, I'm going to be talking about Loki, and I'll be exploring the same concept of the Marvel version of Loki and how it actually had a different effect than I believe the Marvel version of Thor. I think the Marvel version of Loki was too kind to him in some ways, but it also gave him more prominence and more followers in the sense of people actually venerating him as a deity. Whereas I feel like Thor got the short end of the stick and was not portrayed correctly. And it might not be what you think. A lot of people, the first thing they'll jump onto is the red beard and red hair, or at least his general physical appearance. And 100%, like the blonde Australian Chris Hemsworth Thor is probably very far away from what Thor would actually look like. I actually did rewatch Thor: The Dark World before coming into this episode to try to get a fresh mindset and take notes on what I believe are the problems that lead to the modern insignificance of Thor in modern heathenry, but also took quite a few notes. And one thing I noticed as I was watching is that I saw the character Volstagg, which is the burly, red-bearded member of Thor's friend group, and I was thinking, I'm like, that's actually probably closer to what Thor actually looked like if he had a physical appearance and from we know of the descriptions. I'll see if I can find an image I found a long time ago of someone that made Thor from a Marvel poster look more like what he would probably look like. It was a really good image. I'll try to credit the artist if I can find it as well. But I really love that picture because I think, in our mindsets, when you go up to anyone on the street, you say Thor, they're going to picture Marvel Thor. And sadly, I believe that when you go up to many Norse pagans or heathens, you say Thor, it's still the first thing they think about. They don't think about the red-bearded, burly warrior. They think about the blonde Australian Chris Hemsworth. Honestly, the blonde thing is the least of my worries, because let me run through this list here. So I'm going to run through the list of the aspects of mythological Thor. If you haven't checked it out already, I did do an entire deep dive using these books here, diving into what we know about Thor from the mythology and from various sources. So if you haven't already, please check out that video. It's a long one, but it has so much detail into it, and I hope it helps you in your explorations into the mythology and the faith aspect of this. But as far as his aspects we can get from those stories. So Thor is a red-haired, red-bearded, burly warrior. He's easily angered and easily taunted. He's usually the butt end of jokes. We see that in the story of where he had to wear the wedding dress to go get Thor's hammer back. We've also seen that in Harbert's the Old, where he is insulted by Odin himself. We also see that in some degree in Utgarda Loki, where he is, bested by the giants and kind of made a fool of. So he's definitely the butt end of some jokes. But he's also the god of the people. This is very emphasized, that he usually had human servants that followed him around, that he treated them really nicely, that he had a hall full of, potentially, at least in this book, he had a hall full of thralls that he treated really well, gave rooms to, and that he was the peasant's god, which is why he had so much prominence within, I believe, Norway and pre-Christian Scandinavian society. Of course, he was a drinker and a fighter, but largely he was a father, husband, and a son, and very devoted at all of them. While there is some inconsistencies on who his lovers were, we can deter that he definitely married Sif. he may have had a love affair with somebody else before Sif, and that he has potentially between 3 and 4 children. And he's very protective of his family, as we see in Harbestfield and Lokasena, where he is more concerned with protecting the honor of his family than the honor of himself. And we even see that he has moments of wisdom in Alvasmal, where he actually wins a contest of wisdom with a dwarf. And we mostly see tales of triumph over giants and monsters. Almost every one of his stories has him killing giants, fighting the world serpent, or beating insurmountable odds. We do see quite a bit of Loki drama, but it's less personal. Like, he obviously in the Marvel movies, Loki is his brother, so I find it to be less personal. And really, the only story we see them kind of being friendly is Utgarda Loki, where they travel together. At times he's brash, but he is a reliable figure. He gets things done, and finally he is very independent. He seems to do most of his travels alone. Again, certain tales like Utgarda Loki, and the tale where he gets the cauldron from the giants for the Aegir's feast. He is traveling with a companion, but he generally does most things by himself. So let's compare that with the Marvel version of Thor. Of course, what everyone wants to look at, he is blonde, has a short beard, and he's a cut model. He's also angry and easily taunted. They got that right. He is comical, but I don't know if it's for the right reasons. We see that, of course, in Avengers Endgame with Fat Thor, that he definitely seems to be the butt end of jokes, but I don't know if they're as good. But we'll get into that. Eventually, he becomes the god of the people, but he does not start that way. In Thor, the first Thor movie, he is very selfish. He's portrayed as young, but at the same time, he really doesn't get into a lot of character development until Thor Ragnarok, which, we'll get into that in a moment. And then he's kind of mopey and doesn't have a lot of focus through the first couple of movies, particularly Thor: The Dark World. He is just kind of a sad sack of rocks the entire time. Of course, there is the father, husband, and son problem. He is not a father in any of the Thor movies. He is not a husband in any of the Thor movies, and not to mention his love arc kind of sucked. And he is kind of questionably a good son. He's kind of rude to Odin the entire time in a very childish way. And then with his mother, yes, he's a loving son, but ultimately she dies too early to have any true character development. I don't know. And then there's the moments of wisdom thing comparison where it's yes, he has moments of Marvel brilliance. In every Marvel movie, every hero has a downfall, and then they have something that inspires them and gives them a great idea. It literally happens in every movie. If you haven't figured this out yet, I'm so sorry, but it happens every time. It feels very ungenuine, unlike Alvasmal, which is just a good, wise story. And then the, action sequences. I feel like in the Thor movies, they're okay. I mean, Thor Ragnarok probably has the best, but the first Thor movie and the second Thor movie honestly don't have a lot of action. If you actually, especially after I just watched Dark World, it's kind of boring. And he doesn't really fight anything cool. He just fights normal-sized dudes. I want a Thor slaying these massive giants and, fighting the world serpent and all these things. I mean, Thor Ragnarok has some better fights. Of course, he fights the Hulk and things like that. But I think that's coming from the Avengers as well, which gives him some better things to fight. But really, he's just an overpowered smashing machine in the Avengers movies that, is a whole different problem of them having to hold him back because he's, quite frankly, one of the more powerful members of the team. And you get held back by the fact that Thor has to fight the same enemies as Hawkeye with a bow. And this is just that is an overall movie problem, not just a Thor problem. And then you have the Loki connection. Obviously, one of the biggest what moments for anyone following any form of mythology is the fact that Loki and Thor are brothers, and there's really nothing in the mythology to suggest that Loki is the son of Odin, therefore being the brother of Thor. Now, obviously, Loki is adopted by Odin as a giant. I mean, you can maybe make that connection. Because there is this mysterious oath between Odin and Loki, but it seems to be more as equals, less as a father and son relationship. Like I said, they have Utgarda Loki where they travel together, but that's really the only positive moments that we see them having in most of the mythology that still exist. Lastly, he is extremely childish and very dependent on others. Again, this is a Marvel thing. This is a Marvel idea that most of the heroes do things with a team nowadays. They don't do things alone. I don't know if that's because they want to prepare them for the Avengers and any kind of meet-up movies, but for the most part, they're not given... I mean, even in Thor: The Dark World, like, yes, he has the final fight, but, you know, ultimately he needed someone else to, you know, help him along the way, and then he would have died if someone else didn't help him. And it's just like, he comes off as very weak and dependent on others. And you might be saying, like, well, no, that's a good story arc. You know, sure, that's a cool Marvel story, but at the end of the day, that's not Thor. And that's kind of where we're at. I know that's a long-winded explanation, but I think the most important concepts that they got wrong that make Thor not a god figure is the fact that they definitely do not show him being a god of the people. I mean, it takes him all the way up to Ragnarok, by the time, which is, by the way, when everyone basically dies, for him to realize that he needs to be a god of the people, and then he backslides again in Endgame. And so he's shown as being very selfish, where it definitely doesn't seem like in the mythology Thor is selfish. Like, yes, is he got a little bit of a boasting problem, a little bit of an ego problem when it comes to killing giants? Yes, but he's still the god of the people. And so we're definitely missing that in the Marvel Thor. And of course, one of the big ones to me is the father, husband, son issue. Thor is one of the most prominent father, husbands, and sons within Norse mythology. I mean, he's the son of the Allfather. He is the father of two, you know, of amazing children, Magni, Mothi, and Thruther. So he's, you know, seen as a good father, and he's a devoted husband. While there is this issue of Jarn Saxa, of potentially being a lover, there's really no hard evidence that he was, and if he was, it seems like it was before Sif. So he's a devoted husband, which is a great figure to look up to. He's a devoted father and a devoted son. And so these things are not shown in the movie. And again, these are one of the things I think that when you connect with him, should be the things you connect with. And I think they kind of messed up the moments of wisdom. And of course, you know, this is for, you know, anyone that doesn't do a deep dive into the Thor mythology. Alvis Maul almost always gets looked over. Alvis Maul is a great story, and it shows Thor as the son of Odin in the sense that he is a wanderer and that he has wisdom too. He may not be as wise as Odin, but he also hasn't devoted his life to acquiring wisdom. But he's still pretty darn smart. And then I think they really dropped the ball on the tales of triumph, on the tales of beating these big enemies, in particular in the Thor movies themselves. Like, the Avengers maybe a little bit, but in the individual Thor movies, like, he really doesn't have any cool Thor moments. I mean, you don't have the Midgard serpent, which is one of his, you know, greatest adversaries, which will eventually kill him. And that's the thing, like, this tragic story, it's the first story in the Poetic Edda, is Voluspa, is Thor getting killed by the Midgard serpent after killing it. And so it's a very tragic story, but also another tale of triumph. And then, of course, I think one of the biggest problems is that in the Thor movies, he is held back too much. He's not shown as this independent, free-thinking, strong individual. He's kind of shown as weak. I mean, he's shown as weak throughout it. Once again, you might say, well, this is a good character arc because it even shows that gods can be weak. Sure, you can say that, but also at the same time, real Thor in the mythologies, they missed out on the greatest thing, which is him dying to the Midgard serpent. Like, he fails at Midgard or Loki. He dies by the Midgard serpent, his mortal enemy. And so it's like, there are stories in real Thor mythology that show this as well. And the way they show it in Marvel's Thor is not as fitting, I think, for a character like Thor. Notes aside, we have everything down. We have my theories on what Thor is mythologically and what Thor is in the Marvel universe. So what has this done to him that has made it, what I believe, harder for people to look at him as a serious figure to follow as a religion? Well, one, I think it's the stigma. Because if you go up to people, anyone in the street, your friends, your family, a random, stranger, and say, I follow Thor, what are they going to think about? They are not going to think about mythological Thor. They're not going to think about the burly, red-bearded, giant-slaying, good father, god of the people. They're not going to think about that. They're going to think about Marvel Thor. And so I think a lot of people, when looking at the deities and thinking, who do I want to connect with, and what they're looking at with Thor is that they think, ugh, I don't know. I don't know if I can take that seriously now. So with the Thor movies and how he's portrayed in Marvel, I don't think we can take him seriously. And I know I went through this problem as well, is that it's just so hard to look at him and to actually sit down and give an offering to him without, even the most disciplined mind, without Marvel Thor floating in there. It's a discipline. If you're wanting to get into this faith, into this, into this mindset and start giving to him, you really need to step away, I believe, from the Marvel Thor. There might be people out there that Marvel Thor helped them get into this faith. That's fine. I'm happy for you. But also, you need to realize how many problems there are outside of just the red beard and red hair. there is so much more to Thor than what is shown in the movies. And I think the most important aspects of, being a devoted father, son, and husband, being the god of the people, and being, a fierce, independent warrior are not shown in the movies. And those are some of the three most important parts of Thor as a religious figure. I think as Norse pagans, we need to honor Thor more. He's the protector of Midgard. He is the protector of the people. And a lot of people get into this faith for the first time. They'll say, "Oh, I feel Odin." I'm like, that's great. But as I've said before, Odin isn't necessarily the best figure to connect with because he's aloof. He kind of wanders around. He might disappear for a long time. Sometimes his messages are really intense or really vague. And it can be, really hard to, you're not going to get that fatherly love. I know I've talked to people that are like, yeah, I get some fatherly love for him. Like, I've gotten that too, but it's still very sparse. If you're looking for that figure that cares for you and wants you to, learn more from this faith, as we've seen, again, he's wise. There's wisdom there that will also, protect you along the way. I mean, the main thing I use Thor for, at least in my rituals and personal practice, is when I travel, I ask him to protect my home. I give offerings to him to protect my homestead. And so I think if you're going to get into this faith for the first time, Thor is an amazing choice. I just think that Marvel Thor has damaged that opportunity. Because, like I said, I think a lot of people go straight to Marvel Thor, even if they don't think they are. It's still one of the first thoughts in their mind. But I hope this video has helped. I hope it has broken down the differences. I didn't want this to be a butchering of the Marvel Thor movies. If they were great movies, maybe I wouldn't have as much of a problem with them, but there are so many flaws outside of mythology that it really doesn't paint him in a good enough light. But they're still, they can still be entertaining, especially, in Avengers, Thor can be entertaining, give us a good laugh. But I would definitely distance yourself as someone interested in Norse paganism or someone who is actively practicing Norse paganism or heathenry, that we probably need to start taking some big step backs from Thor and Marvel, but also start educating people on what Thor really is. He's a very complex character, one of the most complex characters that we have in Norse paganism, and I really think that we need to start honoring and venerating him more. Until next time, until the hall, Skål!